morning story time continues. Yes, they're arriving. For sure. Yeah. Especially that fifth blocker, that book, I think it was more to stay. He's around the Okay, 23a, here we go. We started a brisa yesterday that talked about a Nazir becoming impure and someone who does the Pesach offering. So we said that the tzitz, the Kohen's headband, does atone for it, for Tumas Dam, but it does not atone for the Tumas Haguf, some kind of impurity on the body. Which impurity of the body are we talking about? So I'm just going to back up 3-4 lines. So we said, the elders of the south said that if you become impure on the 14th in the morning, because you touched one of the sherets, the shratzim, you could still send forth that offering. So that's not what the Bryce is talking about. It must be Ella Tumas Mace. It must be talking about the impurity of a dead body. And what does it say? The Katani Ein Hatzitz Meratza. And it says that the tzitz is not going to atone for someone who becomes impure by touching a dead body. So, what do you see from that? Alma nitmu bailim b'meis ein mishachar b'nesein. Someone who gets impurified by touching a dead body, you will not send forth the offerings. So that statement is against the elders of the south, because they held even if someone touches a dead body on the 14th in the morning, you could still send forth their sacrifice. So, says Marlo, not necessarily a rebuttal. Why? If the owners were impure by touching a dead body, fine. Then I would agree with you. But that's not the case. The Kohen himself became impure through a sheret. So not the person who's owning the sacrifice, but the Kohen himself became impure through a sheret, and therefore that such a service is going to be invalid, and that does not contradict the elders of the south. The Ziknei Ha-Darim. If that's so, that we're saying that the first part of this brisa is referring to the is permitting the is not allowing the tzitz of the Kohen Gadol to atone for a sacrifice that was served, that was brought by a Kohen who became impure through a sheret. If that's true, we have an internal problem. The latter half of the brisa is not going to be parallel to the first half. What does it say in the latter half? This is much more like Psachim. We'll just do like the basics, but Tumas at the home is a impurity that you don't know about till afterwards. So you don't know where we are. You good?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Good. So Tumas at the home. Yeah.
Eventually.
Did you really? Okay, everyone's tired today. You didn't drink it. So Tumas at the home is a tumah that you find out afterwards. So let's say the Nazir or the Kohen, they after the Nazir finishes his Nazirus, you find out that actually he was living on top of a dead body for the last 2 weeks. He didn't know. It was under something, and they did construction. They found a dead body right there. So this Tumas at the home is a tumah that we don't know about until afterwards. And it's halacha Moshe Sinai that there's special leniencies by Pesach and by Nazir. So now, the latter half says, Nitmu Tumas at the home. If they were impure with a Tumas at the home, a tumah that we don't really know about until afterwards, Hatzitz Meratza. The tzitz is Meratza. The tzitz, the Kohen Gadol tzitz, is going to atone for that korban. That's going to be fine. On that brisa, we say, the only time we're talking about tumas at the home, such a category of tumah of the depths, is only by a dead corpse, by a corpse. A few corpses are alive, but most are dead.
It is the season.
Yeah, it is the season. It's Halloween. That's the joke. What do you want people to say at your funeral? Look, he's moving. Yeah. So, yeah. So, anyways, the corpse. So this tumah only applies to a corpse. It does not apply to any other kind of tumah. So now, yeah. So if that's true, so now. Yeah. So tumas at the home only applies to the tumas mace. Fine. So now this latter half of the brisa says so lemute mai, who are we coming to exclude? This tzitz, the Kohen Gadol's headband is going to atone for some kind of tumas at the home, which only applies to the tuma when it's found out afterwards that there was a dead body there. Only such an impurity will be atoned for. So who are we coming to exclude? That is atoned for. What's not atoned for? Is it not coming to exclude a case of that you find out afterward that there was one of the impure shrutzim was there the whole time? That the tzit is not going to maratza for it. The tzit is not going to atone for. Now, if that's true, that we're the second half of the brisa is excluding the impurity of the shrutzim, that means that the first half of the brisa very likely is also excluding that. And yet we established the first case of the brisa to be referring to a case of tumas sheretz. There's an inconsistency. The beginning half of the brisa is referring to a sheretz, and the second half is not referring to a sheretz. They're coming to exclude a sheretz. So that's that was the problem. To which we answer, look, lemuute tumas at the home this ziva. So a man who has some form of not a seminal emission, but a different kind of emission, that makes him a zov. So if he just sees once, he goes to mikvah nighttime, you're good to go. If he sees twice, then he has to have 7 clean days without seeing anything, without seeing any emission. What happens if it's twilight time? It's after shkia, it's before Teis HaKochav, in the middle. Usually the time that we're saying Mariv. We try to finish here in this shul. We try to finish mincha right before shkia. We could have Mariv after shkia. So, but at that time, at the twilight time, if the man sees now this emission, how do you view it? Do you view it as a daytime emission? Do you view it as a nighttime emission? Do you view it somewhere in the middle?
Just an omission.
Just an omission, yeah. So if it's both day and night, so that's like seeing two. That's like seeing twice. Twice makes you a zov. So if it's like only seeing once, but then that's just go to mikvah and then you're good. So we're coming to exclude that case. That case, if you would bring his offering, so that the tzitz, the headband, would not atone for such a tumah, and therefore it's not going to be a problem with the elders of the south. But we have another problem with the elders of the south. Ziknei Adarim. Yeah. So the Elah the Bayram Barchama. So Kohen Hamaratze the Korban is saying, Huchulo tumas at the home, or lo huchulo tumas at the home. Rabbi Bar Chama had a question. A Kohen Hamaratze the Korban is saying, so who's we atone for his korbans. So let's say the Nazir or the one making the Pesach. So let's say he became impure. His question was, does the headband atone for such a tumah, this tumah of the depth? So the Nazir or the Kohen bringing the Korban Pesach, we find out, turns out he's actually impure because there was a impurity of a corpse that we didn't know about. Now that he brings the sacrifice, will the headband atone for that or not? Well, the elders of the south just said for sure yes. But Rami Bar Chama had a question about it. So how come you concluded so conclusively that for sure it does, and Rami Bar Chama was not able to conclude from this brisa the same answer? Must be that the brisa was referring to something else. So Tiv showed the tumas at the home huchalo. Why don't you just conclude from this brisa, like the elders of the south did, that it is permitted for a Kohen or a Nazir to find out afterwards that they were actually impure, there's actually a dead body there, that they could still bring their sacrifice, and the headband of the Kohen will atone for that. So the hacha b'Kohen kaiminun, says the Gemara, because we're for sure talking about a Kohen, says the Gemara, yeah, the Rami Bar Chama vaday pliga. The elders of the south must definitely argue with Rami Bar Chama. It must be a debate. he had a question about this tumah of the dead, this unknown tumah. Does the headband atone for it or not? And they didn't have a question. They concluded they concluded that it does get atoned for. Okay, so that's it. Now that we made a machloket, Rami Bar Chama and the elders of the south, now we're going to bring a brisa reporting and then attacking each side. So Tashma v'nosa Aaron es avon hakosher. So simple verse. Aaron was wearing this headband and he carried the sin of the holy offerings. Some kind of sin he carried meaning he atoned for it. So what sin was that? What sin is he carrying? Which invalidation of a korban is he carrying? First line of 23b. Which sin is he atoning for? So let's go through all the different invalidations of sacrifices and see which one's going to fit the glove. Yeah. So im avon pigel, if pigel, where you have the wrong intent to eat the sacrifice at the wrong time or to eat it in the wrong place, if that's your invalidation, harek farnamar lo yechashev, that's not going to be atoned for. That's out. If it's going to be, you know, it's a weapon. Yeah. So.
Longer than mine.
Yeah. Okay. He's very happy. There's a big smile on his face. It's good. So what? Next time you gotta text me what time Shabbos is. New job you have. If you feel bad, we're getting paid the same amount of money. So Im avon nosar, if it's the oven of nosar, let's say you left over the sacrifice past it's time, maybe that sacrifice the headband will atone for. That's the sin that he's carrying. Same thing, harei karnemer, lo yeratza, it cannot be atoned for. So which sin is Aaron carrying on him that he's atoning for while bringing that sacrifice? Which category? So ha'eno knows ella avon toma. He's carrying the sin of impurity, a sacrifice that becomes impure. The Kohen Gadol, with his headband, is able to atone for that, so to speak, remove its impurity, and you can sacrifice the offering. Shehutra michlala b'tzibor. Now here the Brisa explained why did we choose Tumah out of all the invalidations? Because Tumah has a leniency, as we saw by Pesach. If most of the people are impure, you can still bring that sacrifice. So we see that impurity has a certain leniency, and therefore it makes sense that that is the Tumah that Aaron Cohen can remove with his headband. So it says more which tumah though? My tumah. Which tumah? So tumah has a lot of parts of tumah. Of a dead person, of a sheretz, of what? Maybe you'll tell me if the person bringing the sacrifice was impure because he touched a sheretz, and that's the sacrifice that the Kohen Gadol can atone for. So, but heicha ishtri ela tumas meis. But Erev Pesach, you're only able to bring a sacrifice if most of the Jews are in a state of impurity. That's only if they're impure because they touched a dead person, not if they're impure by a sheretz. The leniency of bringing a sacrifice when most Jews are in a state of impurity only applies to the state of impurity of death. So it would only be such a invalidation that the Kohen Gadol is able to remove with his headband. And what's the case? V'lav kigon shenitmu b'ailim b'meis, where the owners, not the Kohanim, but the owners became impure by touching a dead person. So what do you see? If that is the sin that the Kohen Gadol is carrying, meaning he's atoning for, if that's just, what do you see? Alma nitmu b'ailim b'meis mishal and korban hasayim. When the owners of the sacrifice became impure, you can send forth the sacrifices. Oh, and that is against the elders of the south. Ubimai. Okay, now, which case are we talking about? Ibn Nazir. If we're talking about a Nazir, V'chiyamus meis alav amar achnana. For him, it says, no, it sounds like your person could get death for that, to bring a sacrifice when he's in a state of impurity. So it's not referring to a Nazir. Ela la'ose Pesach. It's the person who is bringing his paschal offering, who he himself touched a corpse that morning, and now we're allowing the offering to go through. Now, if that's true, so that's going to be That's going to be like the elders of the south, and against Rami bar Chama. Yeah, and that's a kasha on Rami bar Chama, who said that you cannot send forth a offering of somebody who became impure on the 14th in the morning. So says Rami bar Chama, I can get out of it. Why? La'olam b'sheret. Really, let's say that the sin that Aaron Cohen, the Kohen Gadol, can atone for is an impurity of somebody who touched a sheret. But what was the problem with that? That the Brisa explains the reason for the leniency by saying it's only an impurity that is permitted when it comes to the public. But if the public all became impure through touching shrutzim, touching these creepy crawlies, they still can't bring the Pesach offering. So that's why we said it wasn't talking about a sheret. So you, Rami bar Chama, who established this brisa as referring to a sheret, so how does the rest of that brisa make any sense? Says Rami bar Chama, no. The shame tuma ba'olam. The brisa reads like this: Aaron Cohen carries the sin. Which sin does he carry? The sin of impurity. Which impurity? The impurity of touching a insect or a rodent, whatever ones get you impure. Then the brisa explains why, because that's permitted for the public. Now, it didn't mean that the impurity of a sheret is permitted for the public. It just meant to say general category of impurity is permitted for the public. So since the general category of impurity is something which has a leniency under that category, so therefore the brisa will still read, and therefore it's referring to, according to Rami bar Chama, he'll have to say it's referring to a case where the guy became impure, and yet we still send forth a sacrifice on Pesach. So basically, a machlokas, the elders of the south, and Rami bar Chama, if in the 14th in the morning somebody came in contact with a dead, with a corpse, and now he wants to participate in the paschal sacrifice, can he or can he not? Elders of the south said yes, and Rami bar Chama said no. This brisa, which allows in the impurity to be permitted, what's it referring to? Each one according to their opinion. Elders of the south, it's referring to the impurity of a dead person. Rami bar Chama can't say that. Rather, it's referring to the impurity of a sheret. Those are two opinions. Now we're going to bring the opposite proof from the same brisa, basically, and then we're going to go on to the next topic. I think there's a nice chart on the bottom of all the different opinions of all the impurities. If you can't sleep tonight after a couple, you'll be able to read. Yeah. So, yeah. The Ika, maybe have your wife read it and tell it to you tomorrow. Yeah. So, sure, fall asleep. So, the Ika did. Yeah. Why? Did you like that? That's your favorite line. I told my wife last night, Steve like that line. Yeah. I'll tell you after. Yeah. So, the Ika did die. Some make the opposite inference. What's the opposite inference? Umaisi hachin, and they say the following. Avon kachim, the brisa reads like this. Avon kachim, some kind of sin of holiness, meaning you impurified something, sacrifices. Ein avon makdishim. So it's only the sin of the ones that are bringing it, but not the ones that are atoning. Meaning the kohanim are the makdishim. It cannot atone for them. It's only avon akachim if the sacrifice, the person bringing the sacrifice, becomes impure. But no, sorry. Avon akachim is referring to the sacrifice itself becomes impure, but not the avon makdishim, but not the ones that sanctify it. Not so. I mean, it's on the object and not on the person. So the headband only atones for if the sacrifice itself is impure, but not if the owner of the sacrifice or the Kohen is impure. So, okay, which kind of tumah are we referring to? So, ilem a tumah sheret. So, if it's referring to the tumah sheret, so then same thing as before. Bryce explained that the tumah sheret, it's only an impurity which the public is allowed to, which we can bring a sacrifice if the public has that, even when the public has that impurity. If it's referring to the tumah of a sheret, the public can never bring a korban because they become impure through such a tumah. So that can't be what we're referring to. Ilim a tumah sheret, me ishtu b'tzibur, that's not allowed in the general public. Elalav tumas ves. It must be referring to the impurity of the dead, the avon kachim, And the avon kachim in, avon makdishim lo, and it must be referring to the sin of the sacrifice becoming impure, but not the people bringing the sacrifice, which would mean that if somebody becomes impure because he came in contact with a corpse, let's call him a Kohen, he's now one bringing the sacrifice, even though such an impurity you allow, if most of the congregation is impure because they touched the corpse, it doesn't matter. This Bryson now is saying it's only if the sacrifice becomes impure. If the person becomes impure with coming in contact with the dead, the Kohen Gadol's headband is not going to atone for that. So if that would be true, so that is against the elders of the south, because they said even if the Kohen becomes impure, you could still send forth the sacrifice because the headband is going to atone for it. But this Bryson now says the opposite. So it's a support for Rami Bar Chama and a difficulty on the elders of the south. To that we say, lo, the olam tuma sheret, same as before. The olam tuma sheret, really it's referring to the tuma of a sheret, of a rodent or a creepy crawly. And that which we said is only something which is allowed when the public, it's only something which has a dispensation if the public has that impurity, and therefore it couldn't refer to this. It just meant to say the shame tuma ba'olam. It just means to say that impurity as a whole, as a general category, has certain leniencies, but we could still be referring to a person who came in contact with a creepy crawly. Such a person, the headband will not atone for. So, okay, that concludes basically impurity. So it started basically a daf and a half ago with the Ziknei Darum statement, and then there's a number of opinions, and now we continue. But there's a nice chart here. Yeah, I think they have in the bottom. Not a chart, they have a summary section. Yoshev, someone who's sitting down. This would be great for me. Can't sit in the base of Mikdash. Yeah, standing. This would be good. Yeah, someone who's sitting is invalid to serve in the base of Mikdash, and if he serves, his service is invalid. Standing desk only. No sitting. Yeah. So Minala, what's the source? Amar Rava, Amar of Nachman, Amar Kra. Says Rava in the name of Nachman, in the name of God. Yeah, La'amod l'sharetz. So it says you should stand up and serve. La'amida b'chartiv below the yeshiva. I chose you to stand, not to go to yeshiva. No, not to sit. I chose you to stand, not to sit. So the service has to be standing and not sitting. All right. That's the statement of Rava in the name of Nachman, in the name of the Torah. And now let's have a brayso that's going to expound on this. It's a mitzvah. It's only a mitzvah. How do you know it's going to be invalid, the service? Maybe it's only a mitzvah to serve standing, but if you want to sit, take a break and serve then, you're good to go. No. Kishu omer ha'omdim, it says it again. You should be standing. So shina lavakasav la'akir. We have this rule numerous times that sometimes you have the Torah says something, and you can interpret that as a mitzvah. That's the best thing to do. But now you want to know, Rabbi, but I did it. Is it still valid? My milk fell into the pot. I wasn't supposed to do that. And now I did it. Is the pot kosher? Right? You usually get all those kinds of questions. So the guy served while sitting. Is it good? No. Why? Because the Torah said it twice. The first time it said it, tell you it's a mitzvah. The second time when it repeated it, like parents to their children, right? Yeah. When they repeat it twice, now they're serious. Yeah. And the third time, forget about it. So you're dead. That's right. Not that it happens to me, but I heard from other parents. Yeah. So when it says it twice, it repeats it to teach you that it's a preventative, meaning if you don't do it, the service will be invalid. Amrle Rabbi Rav Nachman. Rav says Rav Nachman Michti. So now it's interesting. A guy who's sick, so it's invalid. But for some reason, the Gemara wants to categorize him. Who is he like? Is he like a foreigner? I mean, what is he equal to? A Kohen who's sitting. Is he like a foreigner? Is he like a Kohen who's impure? I don't know why you need all this. Just he's someone who's sitting, and that's invalid. So we haven't done this before, meaning through all these invalid. But now we're like, Yoshev is like who? Is it Kizar dummy? No, he's like a Yoshev. I don't know. That's the Gemara assumes. The Yoshev, one who's sitting, is like a foreigner, a non-Kohen, and therefore umachil avoda, and therefore he oh, maybe this is why. I just thought of it. Maybe this is why. All we said earlier was that he's not allowed to stand. Not only is it a mitzvah to stand, you're not allowed to stand. But we never proved, but if he does it, is the service invalid? Maybe he wasn't allowed to do it. Totally no, he's not allowed to do it. But does that profane the service? So simply we say, yeah. But maybe the Gemara wants more about conclusive proof. I don't know. So let's see. Okay. 10 minutes. Here we go. Let's see. Someone who's sitting is a Kazar Dami. Is it like a Israelite, a regular Israelite, the guy that gets Shlishi? Is it like that guy who goes to serve in the temple? Who machil avoda, and therefore he profanes the service? Is that who we're comparing him to? So, Ema mazar b'misa, af yoshev b'misa. So, if that would be true, or maybe we're trying to figure out what his punishment is. If he does it, what's his punishment? That's not clear, so we need to compare it to something else. If he serves, if a foreigner serves, the guy that gets shlishi serves in the base of Mikdash, death penalty, I think from heaven. So too, af yoshev b'misa. So he also, the one who's sitting, will also have the same fate as the shlishi guy. So if that's true, then Allah Matanya, why did the Brisa say about Arel, Onan, Yoshev, the uncircumcised, the person who lost his immediate relatives, and hasn't buried them yet, and the Yoshev, Einan b'misa, they don't get misa. Ella be'azhara, rather they get just a warning that you shouldn't do it. We don't get death. So you see from the Brisa that they're not ones who get death. Mishum dehave mechusar begadim v'shelo richut yadayim v'raglayim. Allah Matanya, why did the Brisa say that someone who's sitting doesn't get misa? Rather, he gets warmed. Is it because the Brisa compared him to somebody who's lacking clothing and serves, or like somebody who's lacking washing in their hands and feet and serves? Well, if that would be true, so we're asking, we're saying. The statement, right? Okay. Why did the Brisa say that he doesn't get misa, rather he only gets warmed? Because the Brisa compares him to somebody who's lacking clothing, or like somebody who hasn't washed his hands and his feet and goes and serves. But says the Gemara, but if that's true, that's shnei ksuvim habayim ke'echad. V'kol shnei ksuvim habayim ke'echad ein melamdin. Meaning, the two times that it says someone gets death is by somebody who's lacking their priestly garments, and by someone who never got sanctified. He never washed his hands and his feet. By those two places, it says if you still serve, you get death. But the rule is that if the Torah wanted something to apply everywhere, it would have stated it only in one place, and you could have applied it to the rest of the places. The fact that it said the same thing in two places teaches you those two and only those two. So only those two services will get one death, but other ones will not. So yeah. Now, this idea that the Torah states something twice is only to teach you in those two places. That itself is a debate. Is it shnei ksuvim, two psukim that you can't learn from, or three times when it says it? That's always two opinions. So whenever you bring this up, it says it in two verses, and therefore it does not apply everywhere else. That's according to one opinion. Ulamandam or melamdin, even if it says it in two places, you could still apply it other places. Three places, then you can't apply it. Ulamandam or melamdin, so then shisuye yayin havilei shlishi. The one who drinks wine is the third place where it says you're going to get death. So the shlosha ledivra hakol ein melamdin, and therefore, according to everybody, you cannot learn from this. So at the end of the day, what are we saying? That we're learning from someone who's a foreigner. Is that correct?
Kind of, but even that one was disqualified.
Because the Brisa says that no misa. So, right, so that gets rejected. We thought maybe he's like a foreigner, but if we think he's like a foreigner, then we see the Brisa says not that way. So at the end of the day, the one who's sitting that serves is not like a foreigner, and therefore he's not going to get death. Only get death for those three cases. Okay, Omeid al gabe kalim. Now, okay, it's a little interesting. So now, okay, you can't sit, but can you stand on something? Yeah, if I was a Kohen, I'd be a little short. I need a little stepping stool, right? So can you step on a stepping stool? So another way of saying stepping stool is, can you stand on vessels? Al gabe kalim, al gabe behema. You want to stand on the animal and get a better view, yeah? Al gabe ragle chavero. It's like when I was in Crown Heights in 770, growing up for Rosh Hashanah, you can't stand on the floor, stand on someone else's feet. It's too packed. There's nowhere to, you float. So all those things are invalid. You have to stand on the ground. You cannot have what we're going to see, a chatzitza, an imposition. Yeah, imposition. An imposition between you and the floor. So, Minola, how to know that that's true? The Tana debate, Rabbi Shmuel, Ho very logical. The whole Veritzpa Mikudeshes, the floor is holy. The Klishares Makdishim, and the vessels themselves are holy. Not Klishares. You and the vessel can't have an imposition between you and the vessel. Afaritzba, so to the floor. Just like the vessel can't have any imposition between you and the vessel, so too between you and the floor, you can't have any imposition either. Whatever is holy can't have something separating between you and it. The Rashi says that the verse says the Kohen has to take the vessel with the blood. Nothing can be separating between you and the vessel. So if I'm wearing, let's say a glove, so it's not me taking it, it's me, and then the glove is between me and the cup. That can't be. You have to take it, your hands on the vessel. Why? Because it's holy. So to the floor is also holy. Therefore, right, Moshe Rabbeinu by the bush. What Hashem tell him, take off your shoes. It's a holy place. Holy place, you gotta take off your shoes. Yeah. And she'll keep them on. Yeah. So yeah. V'tzricha di'ashrin and kli. That's right. V'tzricha di'ashrin. Now you have to have both of these cases to teach you that you can't have an imposition. Why both of them? Di'ashrin and kli mishum delav mina the basar nenu. The vessel is not something which is made out of flesh. Aval behema the mina the basar. An animal also has flesh like you. So you'd have thought that only a malo, because you and the animal are both similar, you both are flesh. So maybe there you could stand on the animal, that's fine. But Yashmin and Behema, if you only had a teaching of the animal that I cannot stand on the animal, that's because the lav mina the other move, because it's not a person, it's an animal. Aval chaveiro, but maybe my friend, who is a person, him I can stand on his feet. So amalo, you need all the case to teach you no vessel standing, no animal standing, and no toesies. Yeah, no footsies with your friends. Yeah. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Raglo Achas ala Kli. So you have 1 foot on the Kli, Raglo Achas ala Ritzpan, 1 foot on the ground. Or Raglo Achas ala Evan, Raglo Achas ala Ritzpan, 1 foot on the stone and 1 foot on the ground. So what do you do? So this we mentioned this idea before. Is the thing you're standing on, if you were to move it, you're going to fall on your face or no? Or keep your balance? So Rowan, if you have 1 foot, that's still considered standing. You have 1 foot on the floor of the Beit Mikdash, that's fine. If your other foot is on this thing, and if you remove that stone, you would fall down, then that's like sitting. But if you would not, so then that's still considered standing. So fine. Now, Boy Rabbi Ami, Nidal Ha'evan. So it sounds like one of the stones from the ground got a little wobbly. They got a little wobbly. And you stood on that stone. Stone wobbled out of the floor a little bit, yeah? So, and you stood on it. Mahu. What's the halacha? So is that going to be invalid? Is that valid? How do you view that? If you have no plan, that stone is done. You have no plan to attach it. So then that's obvious. If that stone is now going to be removed and you're never going to attach it again, so for sure it's going to be an imposition. So that's for sure true. When are you asking your question? Did daito lechabra? You want to attach the stone back to the temple, to the floor of the temple? Nine. On the one hand, given the daito lechabra, kama the mechabra, damia, since you want to go attach it, we can already view it as more attached, and therefore it's not going to be in a position. Or look practically, right now, is it removed? It's removed. It's removed, it's in a position. That's going to be a chatzitza. So how much do you having in mind to attach that stone again going to remove the invalidation of an imposition? So that is the question. Okay. We'll stop here. What did we do? We did half an almond and almost almond and a half, almost about.
She was getting used to it. Yesterday. But that's it. So, it's really simple.